Today we are joined by Paula Rastrick, who is a hormone sensitivity and trauma specialist, and she is going to tell us all about her own journey and some of her findings through her research. So keep watching. Hello and welcome to Hormones on the Blink, the podcast. We are back with another episode and we are really excited. Whoa, I can't even talk.
Excited.
That must be a symptom. Because I can't talk properly.
Maybe it's one of those days.
Maybe it is.
Maybe it is.
But we're excited, aren't we?
We are
That's what I was
excited.
trying to say.
Either which way. So today we're really excited to be joined by Paula Rastrick. And we're going to have a chat with her a bit about her experience, her background, her menopause journey, and her writing of her book. So hello, Paula. Thank you for joining us today.
Hi, Paul.
Hello. Thank you for having me. And I'm excited as well. So we're all excited.
We're all excited. So, Paula, do you want to just tell us a bit about you, a bit about your kind of what you do, what your background is, if you like?
Yeah, so at the moment, I've taken some time out and I've been studying. I've done a postgrad in psychological trauma, and I'm currently in the middle of my EMDR training, and I've written a book. So I've kind of taken a sort of sabbatical, if you like, based on the experiences that I've had through my own menopause or perimenopause to menopause transition. And I'm preparing to sort of launch my book and my new business and my services next year.
Well, that sounds like, again, we're going to overuse this word today. I think it sounds like a very exciting time.
It does.
Paula, do you want to talk us through a bit about your menopause journey, kind of where it started, where you first realised, and kind of the impact that it had on you?
Yeah, so it was back in 2017, so quite a few years ago now. And I just want to kind of reiterate that it was before menopause was mainstream or the conversation was mainstream. It was very sort of new then. It was way before the sort of explosion that we've got now in conversation. And I had left a very stressful career in professional football. And my husband and I decided to set up a business. And so we set up a joint business venture together, which was all very stressful, as you can imagine. And at that time, I was sort of 44, just turning 45. And the combination of everything, the kind of whole ball of life and stress and, all of that stuff kind of came to a bit of a meeting point, if you like. And one of my friends said to me, have you considered that you might be perimenopausal? Because I was starting to have more increased anxiety and I wasn't sleeping very well and I was struggling. And the only way I can describe it is I felt like I was drowning. And every time I tried to come back up for air, I was being pulled under again. And considering through my life, I've always probably operated within this sort of high functioning anxiety, if you like. I've always been a high flying, sort of high functioning anxiety type of person. This was different because instead of being able to pull myself back up again quickly, I felt like I was spending more time under the water and not and then kind of gasping for air, right? And then being pulled back under. And she said to me, it could be hormone related. So you could be perimenopausal. And I was just like, being honest, you know what? I don't care. I need to keep going because I'm used to keep pushing through. So whatever. And she said, go and see a private menopause specialist because at that point, that was when it was very, very new. And she said that HRT may help me.
Okay. So you had, just to pick up on a few things you said there, you had a lot going on.
A lot going on. There were many issues. I'd been in professional football for many years. My husband was in professional football, and we ended up, losing our jobs, and then we ended up setting up a business. We lost our house. So can you imagine the stress and the pressure in this kind of it was like an atom bomb. That's how I feel, like just smashed into our world, because we both were then made redundant. We lost our house. And could you imagine the stress that that's then putting on the marriage and the our young son, and and then me going, because this is me, right, we'll start a business. Okay, let's go. And sort of me pushing through,
Yeah.
because that's how I survive. And
Yeah.
him having a completely different coping strategy, which is retreat, retreat, retreat. So we're going like this, apart,
Separate
yeah,
ways of
going
coping.
in completely,
Yeah.
and my strengths are, you know, at times I push through and survive, right? And those survival skills that I've learned from a very young age, they can be really productive in times of emergency, but they're also one of my not one of my strengths in a lot of ways, because I will plow on and not look after my own health, if that makes
Yeah.
sense. Yeah. So I'm used to this sort of like, right, you know. So we set up a business. I mean, it was, when I look back, I can laugh about it now, because when I look back, I think, what were we doing? I mean, we literally have no business plan. I mean, I remember saying to him, so I think we might have 3 people in the first week, and he was like, okay, 3, and we're writing it down. And we opened the doors of the business, and I had 160 people on. It was, and so the drowning sensation, going back to that, was
Mm.
just even worse, wasn't it? Because now I'm on this roller coaster and I can't get off.
Yeah.
I'm dealing with so many different people in the public, and I'm drowning myself. And that was this kind of start of this quite a long process of what I would call, you don't call it now a breakdown, but I think, yeah, culminated in a breakdown, really.
Yeah. Wow. And I think what you said there as well, that visual is something I can really relate to, that feeling of drowning, right?
Yeah.
Of knowing that the demands on you, they far outweigh your
The
capacity now.
capacity to cope. Yeah,
And you've always
Yeah.
been able to cope with it, but
exactly.
now you
Yeah.
can't. And that's, I think, what we hear from a lot of women perhaps questioning or not realizing just yet that they're in perimenopause is, well, I've got a lot on my plate, but I've always had a lot on my plate. Maybe
Yeah.
I've always been able to cope with that, and now I can't.
Yeah.
Your stress resilience, when your hormones start to shift, particularly in perimenopause, those hormonal shifts, that really does have an effect on your window of tolerance and your window of stress tolerance, because it becomes even more narrow, and you do
Yeah.
not have the same stress resilience, and the coping strategies that you've always relied on no longer work. And so it's really discombobulating, because you're thinking, well, I've always done this. Why is it not working? And
Yeah.
realizing that the brain and the nervous system and the body are going through a significant recalibration process, just like puberty,
Yeah.
right?
Mm.
And we've not realized that, in my opinion, this is a process. It's a process. It's a transition. It's a biological and a psychological transition that affects multiple aspects of your biology, your psychology, your psyche, your self, your understanding of
Yeah.
self. Because past traumas can come back up, and they do come back up. And you start to question your identity. You start to question, what am I here for? What am I doing? And it opens up this kind of whole Pandora's box of questions. That's my experience.
Yeah.
And I've heard that from a similar experience. I can relate to that, but I've heard that from a lot of women. Who am I now? Who am I now? What's my
Yeah.
role now?
Mm.
Yeah. Where do I sit? What's my purpose?
Yes.
Where am I going? Because a lot of the times as well, it coincides with other things, doesn't it? So it coincides, that junction coincides potentially with children or non-children. It's both relative, isn't it? So, it's that kind of looking at your direction, and perhaps potentially if you have children, they're sort of getting older, or they're moving and flying the nest. And so perhaps your identity may have been formed around parenting,
Yeah.
or it may be formed around not parenting. That it's not a case of just one or the other. It's a case of each individual going through this huge psychological shift, that I didn't understand. And I think now, having the hindsight and the work I've done to go backwards to join the dots, now I can see in a much clearer, cohesive way.
Yeah.
Paula, can I ask? So you speak about how going through it, your stress resilience is not what it was, but actually flipping that, and I think we've touched on this before and had conversations with people about this. Actually, do you think that there is an element where your stress can actually bring on these symptoms and bring on, and I guess that links in with the trauma as well.
Yeah, kind of make
Yeah.
them worse.
Yeah.
Like they might have been manageable, but actually
Yeah.
because of all the stress you've got.
Yeah. And we speak
Yeah.
about stress being
I think that one of the big pieces of the jigsaw that we're not giving enough sort of exposure, if that's the right way, is the understanding fundamentally, if we look at this from a very fundamental basic biology, then as human beings, we are born to survive, right? So
Yeah.
survival comes before reproduction. And when you come to the hierarchy of understanding the nervous system and you understand the hormones, our sex hormones, and the role that they play within the nervous system, these sex hormones are not the primary regulators of the nervous system. And so therefore, survival, your stress response, your HPA axis, your instinctual survival response far, far, far outweighs your sex hormones. So if there's any stress, right, you're going to be already suppressing your sex hormone production anyway. So I think we've got it round the wrong way. I think we're not understanding that actually we need to look at inflammation and stress and understand the stress response and understand those stresses and how that then has a direct downstream effect to your sex hormones. We're kind of looking at it the other way, and it's like that doesn't work.
Yeah.
Do you see
We're
what I'm
trying
saying?
to like top up, if you like, the hormones on this side and look at it all from that angle
Which,
without addressing
yeah.
the bit that's maybe causing some of the
Elephant in the room. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think this is because people are, I mean, I was talking about this yesterday, right? Let's just be really, really transparent here. I've done a lot of work starting from the womb to the end, if you like, right? So in terms of how you develop in the womb, how you then develop neurodevelopmentally, right? Before you even hit puberty, okay? Then you've got puberty, then you've got your life, and then you've got at the end what we call neurodegeneration. And you can't separate, you can't sort of start at the middle and go, let's talk about neurodegeneration, which seems to be happening, without understanding the beginning. Do you see what I'm saying? Because some women are more sensitive. And when you're more sensitive, you have a more sensitive stress response.
yeah.
You have a more sensitive sensory processing. You are more sensitive to environmental cues. You are more sensitive to hormonal changes. And so this is where I think we're not understanding the relationships with our environment as well as our hormones, because we're kind of saying, right, it's like a car. We're sort of saying like, right, okay, well, what happens, guys, is you need to top up your hormones. Well, your hormones are constantly reacting to your environment. That's what they're there for. So
So it's like putting petrol in, but it's like leaking out somewhere else because actually, yeah.
it's a dynamic process, isn't it? You're a dynamic, moving person. You're not like sitting still and somebody goes, let's put some more oil in the tank and then you'll be fine. It's a bit like the testosterone kind of, when you understand testosterone and you understand the nervous system, which is the work that I've done, all of your hormones interact with the environment. And one of the ways that I put across the kind of testosterone is testosterone as a chemical is there to, one, mobilize you, sharpen your focus, and recruit your muscle strength to be able to run away from danger and fight. But because that's what we know that, then the other side of it is it's a pro-social chemical because it's there for sexual connection. It's there for relationship building. All of our hormones are there for two purposes, which is connection, which is reproduction, and survival,
Yeah.
which is to stay alive. But the hierarchy is survival
Comes
comes
first.
before reproduction.
Yeah. So you talk a lot, don't you, about sensitive women?
Yeah.
Okay. So sensitive women that have a more sensitive hormonal
Nervous system.
nervous
Yeah.
system and profile. At what point did you kind of realize that maybe you fell into fell into that category, if you like? And how have you been able to kind of identify that?
Yeah. The patterns. The
Yeah.
patterns. Right. So first of all, I'll start with the fact that my own journey of understanding what we term neurodivergence, which I would like to argue against neurotypical, because I don't believe there's a neurotypical brain. I think that that's just a myth. I don't think there's a
It's like
neurotypical
normal,
brain.
isn't it?
Yeah, it's like trying to
the-
say, you know, when
what
you
is
look at the
normal?
way that the nervous system develops, there is no normal. That this is a complete myth. Society may say that you have to act in a certain way or think in a certain way in order to fit the sausage factory of school, or but that's not how the brain develops, and that's not how the nervous system develops. And I firmly believe that in the next couple of years you're going to see more and more people going, oh, actually I identify with these traits and these traits, and they're all crossing over, right? And that's another thing.
Yeah.
They're all crossing over. So PMDD, the relationship between PMDD and ADHD and autism and binge eating and substance abuse and suicidal ideation, and all of this is the nervous system. It's not, do you see what I'm saying? And when you actually look at the way the nervous system develops, and that's what I've done, I've tracked, it started really for me, sorry to go back, it started really with me thinking, oh, I identify with being a highly sensitive person. So I started looking at the work around Elaine Aron, who was
Yeah.
talking about some
HOTB.
people are more highly sensitive because of what happened to me, right? And then it's grown from there. So I started with a highly sensitive person and making the links to actually this really is me, blah, 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 investigate that. Then I started to look at my own history and my father, and both my dad and my granddad both died of motor neurons disease. So there's a genetic-y kind of component. So then I started tracing that back. So then I started to look at my own complex trauma history, growing up in the environment that I grew up in. And then I started to look at how the psyche develops. Then I started to go over to, well, actually, now I've been diagnosed with ADHD, but actually I don't believe the clinical diagnosis, because it's a tick box exercise. Then I started to look at autism and think, well, actually, I kind of have flavors, because now people are saying, well, highly sensitive people is autism and autism is highly sensitive people. And that's because you can't actually separate who's the DSM has classified what they call disorders. I disagree completely with the language of disorders.
Yeah.
I think it's the wrong terminology. It's making out that because your brain operates this way, there's something wrong with you. There's nothing wrong with any of us. A lot of us have, skills and creative skills and pattern recognition. So, when I looked at the old days, in my old days of Rain Man, where it's like pattern recognition, where you're seeing in your head, I could relate that to the work I've done where I've gone over research and I've joined dots. I've taken research from psychiatry and I've joined that dot. Then I've gone over to here and joined this dot. So what I've done is not a complete sort of, this is the answer. What I have done is I've joined dots that other people haven't joined, put that into a cohesive story, which is based on my story, to help to ask for more research, because the links to PMDD, PMS, perimenopause, postnatal depression, are coming from the nervous system.
Can we come to that? So I'm just thinking about people that might be listening to this podcast, right? And maybe they have got PMDD. We talked about PMDD before, and they might be struggling with PMS. It might be endometriosis, right?
Yeah.
So let's say, and we know there's links. There are some studies that indicate there's links there between trauma and endometriosis. People ending up with endometriosis. So talk us through that bit of the nervous system early on. What's happening to the hormones? Why are we more likely to maybe
to
end up with PMDD or endometriosis?
Yeah, okay. So I think to make a very complex subject as simple as possible, I'm going to try to say that, first of all, across the board with all, I will call it women's reproductive health, but we're talking about mental health as well.
Mhm.
There is links to early life stress, which is, I will talk about early life stress, adverse childhood experiences. We're talking the language of, yeah, and trauma. But what we're not understanding is the definition of early life stress. And I'll give you an example. So early life stress is classified when you're in the womb and just as you come out of the womb.
Right. Okay.
And that early life stress, there's the links now. So, for example, if I'm in my mother's womb and my mum is in an environment that's unsafe, right? And she's being abused, or her mental health is she's passing that cortisol and that information to me
Wow.
in the womb. That is then starting to shape my own stress profile. This is while I'm in the womb, right? Also, my sex hormones, the ratios, because this is another thing, that it's the ratios between your sex hormones that are causing the problem, not a deficiency. It's a nervous system thing. So my profile started to be shaped. Then I come out. So I have a forceps delivery. My dad's not there. My mum's on her own. She's 21. She's been disowned by her parents because she married my dad. I have a difficult delivery. That's linked to autism. That's linked to it. Do you now see what I'm saying? We're not understanding that it starts way back. So this is neurodevelopmental. Then I come into the world and my attachment processes with my mum are not there because of various issues. And I'm not blaming my own mum. So I'm making that clear, right? So then you need that attachment. And those attachment wounds and disruptions, it happened with my son. We had an emergency C-section. He was taken off me. Those very early attachment processes are starting to shape your nervous system and your stress sensitivity. And then you go into, say, your neurodevelopmental years, which is your adverse childhood experiences, for example. Before you even hit puberty, if you are having, like I did, adverse childhood experiences, my nervous system is responding to the environment, right? I've got higher stress sensitivity. I'm more hypervigilant. In essence, I am my profile is higher estrogen because I'm higher in glutamate, which is this is the thing people have not recognized, the primary neurotransmitters, the master regulators of the brain and nervous system are GABA and glutamate. Glutamate is your excitatory master regulator. GABA is your inhibitory master regulator. The two of these work like yin and yang, right? To regulate homeostasis in the brain. Does that make sense? In the nervous system, right?
Yeah.
I've started my life with higher ratios of glutamate, estrogen, right? Higher excitatory tone and lower inhibitory tone, which means my window of stress tolerance is more narrow than perhaps someone else's. And as you develop throughout life, what you've got to think of is when you come to puberty, right? When you hit puberty, your brain circuitry, your hormonal profiles, your master regulators are already formed, aren't they? They've got your circuitry. Let's put it that way, your synapses, your circuitry. Then your sex hormones, which have been quiet, by the way, they're not involved. They're just quiet after they've done their organizational bit and joined in with the they go quiet. So when you get to puberty, when those sex hormones surge, they're joining in which is why if you've then developed what we're going to call ADHD or autism or complex trauma, because you can't distinguish between complex trauma, ADHD, autism. I've got the research, right? So now you're hitting puberty and you're joining in. Does that make sense what I'm saying? Your sex hormones are joining in an existing blueprint. Is that make sense more, right?
Yeah.
Then if you go into your teenage years, because the brain is highly sensitive in the teenage years, right? And you have stress, trauma, right? That's again rewiring your brain and nervous system, which is affecting the ratios of your sex hormones. So it's all connected. And up until about 25, your brain is highly plastic. So let's just say it's very stress responsive, especially in the teenage years. This is why, as a teenager, I'm out seeking dopamine. I'm out doing stuff that other girls probably wouldn't have done. Do you know what I mean? Like, because I'm a high dopamine seeker, I'm a high
Yeah.
sensation seeker. I'm out there, so now we're starting to understand, how does that then mix with my psyche, my temperament, my personality? When you hit 25, your brain still remains plastic. So I'm just giving you a kind of, but your hormonal fluctuations, right? They change the brain as well. This is what people are not realizing. So, in a nutshell, hormonal fluctuations during reproductive phases, I'm talking about your cycle, I'm talking about puberty, I'm talking about pregnancy, and I'm talking about perimenopause, disrupt the balance of excitation and inhibition in the brain. And if you've already got higher hyperarousal, am I making sense? You've got a higher anxiety. Because let's face it, women with ADHD, women with PMDD, we are operating on higher levels of anxiety. And then we'll have the crash when we go into depression, the flat state, because the flat state is where the nervous system has to shut down. So you're going up and down in outside, because the brain and the nervous system, the disruption of homeostasis is coming from the fluctuations and the movement of the hormones. Is that making any sense?
It does make total sense.
Wow.
Yeah.
I am blown away. When you listen to something, you think that all makes sense now.
Yeah, you can you join up your own dots.
Yeah.
That's what I'm trying to do, guys, because I've put my story, right? And then I've put science to my story, because I can't say, oh, it's not a scientific hypothesis, because we haven't got the research. What I've done is I've joined up dots and I've made a story, right? Which I'm kind of just told you. And then that story then will make sense to other women.
Yeah.
Because the story makes sense, it then helps you to make sense of yourself. And then I'm going to take it to the researchers in hormonal sensitivity, because I've taken a lot of their work on PMDD, and they are in Chicago. And I'm going to give them the book and say, look, will this help to join rest of the dots? Because they're already joining the dots, but they haven't started where I started, which is in fetal programming.
Oh, I think a lot of female at birth individuals will listen to this and think,
Yeah.
oh, yeah,
And
We're not trauma. Trauma gets thrown around as a word, and sometimes I get frustrated, because I'm like, no, you're not understanding. The nervous system reacts to environmental stresses. Also, you might have so you might have a different stress profile to me, right? Depending on your temperament, depending on your personality, depending on your
thing, isn't it?
environment.
We're all so unique. Our upbringings are so unique. Like you've mentioned about, delivery at birth might be, they're all unique to us as individuals, aren't they? And what one feels
And what your mum. So
so
if you think about it, I mean, this is what I'm saying. If you think about it, we should be starting with neonatal care, shouldn't we? We should be understanding that pregnant women, and is the most fundamentally important start of life. Well, we don't realize it. I didn't realize it. I mean, I had a lot of stress in pregnancy. That's in the book. I had postnatal depression. This is nothing to do with blaming. It's just about understanding. Because I'm myself. No, and my boy had a difficult birth. Well, that difficult birth has started to shape his hormonal profile and his personality and his nervous system and his psyche. Now, do you see what I'm saying? And we're kind of like, we're looking at it from a very sort of like, open the book. This is what I've done with the book. I've opened the book in the middle, the part where I've had my breakdown, and the part where I'm suicidal, and the part where I cannot think of any way out anymore, right? To demonstrate that if you just look at this part of my life, you don't know what happened to me before.
Yeah.
So let's talk about that for a moment, because obviously it's empowering to know, to be able to join these dots, to be able to understand, to be able to piece things together, make sense. But also at the same time, I guess there's part of it where people might be thinking, well, I can't do anything about the birth how that went. I can't do anything about postnatal depression that I had because that's
Exactly.
and now let's say I find myself coming into perimenopause and they're maybe relating to what you've gone through, Paula, of these words that you describe, feeling like they're drowning, maybe feeling like, do you know what, I just don't want to go on like this anymore. What is it that these women, what would be really helpful for them to know, to understand at that point?
So I think there's several things, right? So one of them is that I believe that, I mean, we call it HRT, so we'll just call it HRT. I believe that that has a place, but I believe it has to have more understanding of the nervous system so that people can be treated more individually. Because in perimenopause, for example, you were in a low progesterone state, not a low estrogen state.
Yeah.
And if you've already got higher estrogen, because you've already got higher glutamate and histamine intolerance, which is another thing that people talk about, mast cell activation and all of these crossovers, that's because of the EI balance, right? So the last thing that you to do would be to put more too much excitatory hormones in your system. So you'd want to start looking at the inhibitory chemicals, which I believe is progesterone. But then there's an issue with progesterone sensitivity, which I also explain in my book, but we probably haven't got time. I explain progesterone sensitivity because it's not progesterone. It's to do with allopregnanolone, the GABA receptors. It's not just a case of, so again, there are, but for me, understanding that, you know, magnesium, vitamin, your B vitamins, we tend to be low on those types of chemicals. Also vagal tone. So we are typically low in vagal tone, right? And so looking at the nervous system in terms of increasing your vagal tone and your HRV.
Let's just talk about, if anyone's listening, vagal tone.
Right.
I know what you're
Vagus
talking
nerve.
about, but let's explain about what the vagus nerve is.
So there's quite a lot of new research coming out that is around the connection between the brain and the body and the vagus nerve, which is a cranial nerve that kind of connects everything together. And just like a muscle, if you go strength training, if you have low vagal tone, imagine it's a muscle, you and I do, you want to be able to build stress resilience and stress capacity to widen your window of stress tolerance, because you're going to have less on those hormonal fluctuations if you've got a wider window of stress tolerance. And so increasing what's called vagal tone is working with your vagus nerve. And there's plenty of it around. You can go and look on YouTube, on social media. I mean, this is what I will be doing as I move into my new business, looking at the evidence around that. And you can do that for free. So you want to be looking at, how do you build stress capacity? And you do that through understanding the vagus nerve.
Yeah.
Isn't one of those to pull? I do a lot of pulling
Here on your
on
ear.
my ear.
So it goes down into your this part of your
Yeah.
Yeah, there's
Kind of
loads
you
of
can
things you
do,
can do.
like
I mean, so what
cold
I'm
water.
doing,
Cold water's different.
Okay.
Yeah.
so what I'm doing is I'm now, I've just trained in what's called the Safe and Sound protocol. And the
Okay.
Safe and Sound protocol is a nervous system, vagal nerve music therapy. So it's all around sound. Yeah. So it's all around sound therapy and nervous system regulation. So I am taking that, that's the vagus nerve component. Then I've got my EMDR, right, which is the processing of trauma, the processing of the, because again, you want to, it's not for everyone, right? But actually processing your trauma goes a long way to actually releasing that trauma from the body.
Yeah.
Because we know now, right? We know that it's a bottom-up approach. You know, you're holding that and storing that. The body and the nervous system is imprinted with trauma. It's not a case of just, oh, I just talk about it. And so combining these kind of brain-body modalities, vagal nerve toning, and with EMDR, which I just helped me massively, and then looking at what I call parts work, which is about the parts of you, your psyche. And I just think this integrated approach, and HRT, listen, if people get it right, brilliant. But you can't get it right if no one understands, this is my opinion, if you don't understand the nervous system.
Yeah.
How is getting it back? You're throwing stuff at it and hoping for the best. And HRT given incorrectly can cause huge side effects
Yeah.
because it changes cognition, it affects mood regulation, because it's a hormone it's hormones being taken from the outside and put into an existing nervous system.
Yeah.
Does you see what I'm saying?
So to recap on kind of what you've said there, let's say we've got these women that they're entering perimenopause. They are maybe things are coming up from them from the past, right? They're remembering things they know they've been through. They've had traumatic experiences. They're looking for support in terms of HRT. That really potentially what they're thinking about is for a time, progesterone only HRT might help them, and that if they are put on estrogen, to look out for those signs of increased
Anxiety.
anxiety, of suicide, ideation, those things. And
The amount of women that I have spoken to that have said to me, estrogen has increased my anxiety,
yeah,
right? Well, that's why I've done this book, because it will, because it's a stimulant, right?
yeah,
It's the ratios, isn't it? It's not don't have estrogen, but if you're in early perimenopause,
you don't need it right now.
you don't need higher estrogen
Yeah,
in and I'm talking about the research that I've based my book on. So from a medical perspective, I'm not medically trained, so I just want to make that clear. But from the nervous system perspective, I'm giving the science and research around the nervous system, not around HRT doses. Do you know what I mean? I'm making that really clear.
I do.
It
But
doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense when you look at the brain and nervous system.
no. But for those women they're in perimenopause, they may be thinking, do you know what? I know I've had a difficult time in the past, whatever that might be. Having that, I think, in their mind in terms of HRT, that if they start on it and it doesn't start feeling right, they-
Stop.
to stop and to have that on their radar. But I also think
Yes.
you've mentioned some other interesting things in there. You mentioned a lot of interesting things, but you mentioned about low B vitamins, magnesium. So we can go to the GP and we can ask them, can't we, to do a full set of bloods,
Yeah.
right? So then people can ask, can't they, for a printout of that? So tell me what that says. And that could be a starting point of my B12 is low.
100%.
My B, whatever it is low.
Yeah, you've got to look at it from if you understand the nervous system, I think it makes things much more simple, which is why I've done this, right? But for example, say you're a woman that says, my histamine intolerance has increased or mast cell activate. That's a sign of high estrogen.
Yeah.
That's a sign of high excitatory tone.
Yeah.
That's a sign of inflammation.
Yeah.
So I look at it as, and the way that I do it on my social media now is red chemicals are fight, flight,
Yeah.
and blue chemicals are low arousal. So you've got high arousal and low arousal. Well, low arousal is not good either, is it? Because that's your shutdown. You're kind of depressed. You're kind of burnt out.
Yeah.
The nervous system is shutting down to protect energy. That is what the nervous system will do. So, and then we understand that somewhere in the middle, we'll say, is your window of tolerance and your homeostasis, right? You're trying to have more time spent in homeostasis within the window of tolerance, aren't you? Well, if you're being pushed up with too much excitatory tone, which is too much estrogen, and you're experiencing anxiety, that's not a perimenopause symptom. That's a symptom of too much estrogen. And yet women are being told, take more estrogen because they're saying it's a perimenopause symptom. But perimenopause is typically actually a low progesterone state and a high estrogen state.
So we share information about that in training.
It doesn't make sense, does it? It doesn't make sense.
No, we've got that great graph and we talk that through of like, well, actually, what's the first hormone that drops off?
Yeah.
Well, it's progesterone, and we know progesterone helps with, anxiety, panic attacks, sleep, falling off to sleep.
That's what it does. So GABA, allopregnanolone, and progesterone are inhibitory chemicals along with serotonin. But this is another thing that gets confusing because I see a lot of this. So when it comes to ADHD women or women that identify with ADHD, I see a lot of, we lose our dopamine. And so we need to increase estrogen because estrogen increases dopamine. Well, that is not how it works, right? Because dopamine is both excitatory and inhibitory, and you do not want too much dopamine, right? That's like schizophrenia. That's like, Parkinson's disease. That's like motor neuron, this is what I'm trying to say. So everything is about what's too much. Too much anything is not good for you. Too little is not good for you. But when it comes to dopamine, progesterone regulates dopamine as well. So when you think about estrogen and progesterone, they're there for a reason, aren't they? Right? They're there to modulate the nervous system. Estrogen is excitatory, progesterone is inhibitory. Estrogen pushes up glutamate, progesterone decreases glutamate. Progesterone increases GABA and decreases glutamate. So if you don't understand that and you keep pushing up more estrogen and glutamate, you're going into dangerous territory because that is inflammation.
Yeah.
Does
So
that make
I
sense
feel
now? That's histamine intolerance. That's an inflamed state. And women who are more sensitive are already leaning
towards that inflamed state.
towards inflammation
Yeah.
through stress.
So I feel like somebody somewhere, if they haven't already, needs to invent a machine where we just get to like wake up in the morning and we get plugged into that machine and it's like, right, this is your profile today, this is what's going on for you. And then
But you could start
Oh my
learning that,
gosh,
Sophie, can't
yeah.
you? Because like
Yeah,
once you
you can.
understand it, when your system's out of whack, right? So for
Yes.
example, I've had a really stressful week, right? And guess what happens? I overwork because that's me, right? So I overdo it. I burn my
Yeah.
brain, right? Because that's what I do. I'm a high dopamine, I need to solve this. I want, all of that stuff. And then guess what happens to me? I'm like, don't talk to me anymore.
Crush. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just
I don't want to see anyone. I just want to just be on my own. I don't want to engage with you or you.
To shut
Like,
down.
so how many people recognize that?
Yeah.
like, well, it's like, isn't it, going on holiday, everything's high, everything's great, you come back and you're poorly.
Yeah.
Like that's your body is just like, no,
I'm out.
yeah, I'm done.
So
We are living more on that higher end. Does that make sense? We are more high functioning, high anxiety, more hyper aroused. We're living in that, and we're used to that, right? And then you get to perimenopause, and then all of a sudden,
the wheels come off.
you'll crash. Yeah, you'll crash.
Yeah.
It will be the biggest crash of your life if you're not expecting it, because you won't be able to get back up in the same way that you used to. And then you're starting to think what's happening. And then it becomes, so if we understand it, and we understand it through PMS, and we understand it through PMDD, and also postnatal depression, surely then we can then get to perimenopause in a much more informed state.
Kind of to summarize, I feel like what we've talked about today is fascinating. It is joining those dots, and I think it's going to be really helpful for so many women that are listening today. But let's talk about kind of some practical things that people can take away from it. So we've talked about having that on your radar. If you do start HRT, some people, for example, they go on the Mirena coil, that helps them for a time until they get to perhaps a lower estrogen state. But just to be aware of, if I start HRT and I feel more anxious, I have these perhaps suicidal thoughts, I feel bad.
I think if you just feel bad, so if you like that in itself, if your brain and body is saying to you, it's giving you messages, isn't it? Right? I didn't listen to those messages because I just assumed that it must be me because I was given HRT by an expert, and therefore it must be my issue. And there are a lot of women that are being told that. But your body will tell you, it will say to you, I don't like this.
Yeah.
And that's where you need to listen, because you're not wrong. The body's very intelligent, isn't it? And it's giving you that feedback for a start.
So it's tuning in, and we talk about this a lot, right? That you're tuning in, because we go through life and we get very good, don't we, at switching off from stuff, but tuning into what your body's telling you. So I think that's a great takeaway. If it doesn't feel right, we're the experts in us.
The body
There
knows
isn't
the score.
the body, yeah, exactly. So there's that part. If somebody, Paula, knows that they've had a difficult time, they've had a higher adverse childhood experiences like you talk about, so whether that's parents with mental health problems, whether that's moving around a lot, whether that's a parent that was an alcoholic, etc., whatever that looks like,
A lot of it's co-concurring.
what support do you recommend? You've talked about the work that you do, but does somebody need to go and speak to someone maybe and have to think about having some therapy? What might that look like?
Yeah, I think because at the moment, obviously, I'm not working at the moment because I'm doing all of this, and that's something that I will be offering. But I do honestly believe wholeheartedly that you can't first you can't stick a patch over trauma. So there's no point in trying to stick an estrogen patch over it because it will come back up, right? And to seek therapy and to actually go there and deal with the trauma, because the more we suppress the trauma, the more we push it down, the more we try to the more chronic the health issues are in the long term. And we know that. We know that from the science. And as painful as it might be, it's actually the best thing to do for your health in the long term is to actually deal and process the traumas and process the traumas out of the nervous system, or do you know what I mean, like rather than try to shut it out.
Yeah. So I was thinking in my mind, I don't know about you, but coming back to the car analogy that you mentioned earlier, the putting the petrol in and it's leaking out. I was thinking about a blockage in the engine. So it's like the trauma becomes the blockage in the engine,
Yeah.
and it can never function properly until we've got it out of the system.
Yeah.
And then we're like, okay, the car's function. Don't know why we've gone down a car tangent, but there we go.
I
The
don't know,
car's
but I
functioning
know what you're saying.
well.
It's making sense. It's true though, isn't it? Because we have a lot of kind of the modern medicine, the biomedical model is, very fixed on sort of fix this over here, which is one bit of the engine, but then there's lots of bits over here that are not flowing, right? And if you go into the kind of, yin yang type of kind of like, everything in the world flows, right? And it's supposed to have opposites, isn't it? So for one force, there's another force, right? So if you're not dealing with this stuff, and then one force will become the dominant force, and over time that's not healthy. So you've got to unblock that so the energy gets back to being productive.
Yeah.
And that's the only way that I can sort of describe it. If you're blocked, like you say, if you patch over it, it's like putting sticky tape over the leak, isn't it? And then thinking, right, I'll leave that, but what's going to happen after time? That's going to wear out and get the leak back. You're not dealing with the actual, and sometimes the root cause gets a bit of a root cause, but actually you do need to go to the roots and try to pick the roots out, don't you? Otherwise, nothing, and I don't care what anyone says, it doesn't matter how much HRT or medication or, your body will still hold on to that nervous system imprint, and you're still reacting to triggers, aren't you? Because that's another thing as well, is that you might not remember it, but the body is remembering the triggers, and you're dealing with them on pretty much every day of your life, aren't you?
Yeah.
And this is something I think for anyone of any age, right? If you've gone through stuff, kind of doing yourself a favor and getting that help earlier on, rather than wait
100%.
you get to perimenopause and then pushing.
I'm loving
Imagine if we gave children that. Imagine if, this is what I'm saying. So as a child, this is what I'm trying to say is that, so I wouldn't have known any of this stuff, but say you've had a difficult delivery or a birth, and you know that there's links to the nervous system and autism, and what would you do? Guess what you do? You'd put the interventions in place early when the brain is highly plastic, right? Because it's possible to then remold that nervous system.
It should be made so normalized and mandatory to have therapy like it is in America. It's just go and have therapy. I'm loving I see a lot of younger people now having therapy and speaking about it. And when I say younger, I mean like early 20s. But yeah, you're absolutely right. The younger, the better. Like talk through it, understand it, learn how to be open-minded and understand what's going on in your body. It's
Deal with it, and I mean, if I had those opportunities, which I didn't, and we didn't have the understanding there, I mean, there's just so much understanding more about the nervous system and the development of it. We should be looking at that, not waiting until the middle bit of life and then trying to stick plasters on it. And, really and truly, we should start at the beginning. And that's my opinion. And we should catch it. And we should go, right, okay, let's intervene, because the brain is highly responsive to stimulus, positive stimulus, connection, social engagement, all of these things really for the health of the nervous system. I mean, we don't recognize that. In fact, I think we're moving maybe the younger generation is starting to see it, but I think we're moving away from even social connection in terms of, being around people that light your brain up.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Could go
so
on for another
important.
hour about that stuff.
I know we could probably go another
Yeah.
day.
That's why we do the podcast together, because
Yeah.
yeah, we like on this brain. So on that note,
Yeah.
Paula, we really want to thank you for joining us today. It's been
Yeah.
wonderful, isn't it?
It's been incredible, and I think it will help a lot of people listening.